The courtroom was shrouded in a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Rows of wooden benches were filled to the last seat, reporters clutching notepads, townsfolk whispering behind their palms, and a few wide-eyed teenagers who had skipped school just to witness what they called the trial of the year. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop journalists from sketching scenes with their pens, every flick of the wrist capturing history in the making. At the center of it all stood Clara Jameson. Her wrists were bound in silver handcuffs, the metal glinting sharply under the courtroom lights. She wasn't dressed like the criminal people imagined. There was no darkness about her, no rage in her eyes. Instead, she wore a simple beige sweater, her chestnut hair pulled back neatly, and her face pale, tired, but calm, was the picture of composure. Yet beneath that calm surface, a storm brewed quietly. Across from her sat the prosecution team, 3 people in suits that seemed too crisp, too confident. The lead prosecutor, Vincent Lowell, was a man known for his ruthless precision. He believed in evidence, not emotions, and today, the evidence was stacked against Clara like a mountain she couldn't climb. To his right sat Officer Reynolds, the man who had led the investigation. His posture was proud, his jaw tight. He'd brought with him the star witness of the day, not a human, but a dog. Rex, a large German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, lay quietly at his handler's feet. His coat gleamed like polished gold beneath the light. To the jury, Rex was more than a dog. He was the voice of truth. Trained to detect scents, track trails, and identify guilt, he had never failed a case before. That reputation alone had sealed many verdicts. The judge, an elderly man named Judge Harper, adjusted his glasses and looked down from the bench. "We'll begin," he said, his voice low and commanding. The room fell into even deeper silence. Clara's lawyer, Mark Hensley, sat beside her. He leaned in, whispering, "Stay calm, Clara. Say nothing unless I ask you to." She nodded once, but didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Rex. Something about the animal drew her attention like a magnet. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity and a strange, almost spiritual connection. She had seen Rex once before, during the investigation, when officers brought him to her house. That day, he had barked at her car, and her life had changed forever. Now the same dog sat just a few feet away, silent but powerful, his presence heavy with meaning. The prosecutor stood, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, pacing slowly before them, "this is not a case built on rumors or speculation. This is a case built on facts, on science, on truth. A child is missing, Ethan Cole, age 7. And every trail, every piece of evidence, every reliable method of investigation has led us to one person, Clara Jameson." He turned, pointing at her like a hunter marking his prey. A murmur ran through the spectators. Clara didn't flinch. The prosecutor continued, "We have here Rex, one of the state's top scent-tracking dogs. When given Ethan's shirt to identify, Rex led investigators directly from the school grounds to Miss Jameson's car. There is no greater proof of presence than the word of a trained police dog." The defense attorney rose. "Objection. Your Honor, dogs don't give words." The judge nodded. "Sustained. Mr. Lowell, please stick to facts." The prosecutor smirked slightly. "Of course. The fact, Your Honor, is that Rex has an unbroken record. He has never been wrong. Not once." The jurors exchanged glances. It sounded convincing. Too convincing. Mark could feel the tide shifting already. He scribbled notes furiously, but stopped when he noticed Clara staring at the dog again. Her expression wasn't one of fear, it was thought. She was watching Rex closely, as if studying his breathing, his eyes, his stillness. "Do you believe me?" she whispered under her breath, so quietly that only she could hear it. Rex's ear twitched. Across the courtroom, Officer Reynolds noticed the slight movement and shifted in his chair. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes unease. But then he crossed his arms, masking it behind a stoic facade. The prosecutor began calling witnesses. Ethan's mother first, trembling as she spoke of the day her son went missing. Then the janitor, who claimed to have seen Clara near the parking lot after hours. Each voice added another weight to the growing burden pressing down on her. When Officer Reynolds took the stand, the courtroom seemed to lean forward. "Officer Reynolds," the prosecutor said, "tell us about the search and what led you to Miss Jameson." Reynolds cleared his throat. "We began by canvassing the school area. Rex was given the child's shirt to track. He picked up the scent within minutes and led us straight to Miss Jameson's vehicle. We checked the trunk, the seats, everything. The scent was strong." "And are you confident in Rex's reliability?" "Absolutely. He's the best I've ever worked with." Mark stood for cross-examination, his tone measured. "Officer, can you tell the court who handled the evidence that day?" "I did. You personally?" "Yes. And who else verified the scent trail?" "No one else was required." Mark raised an eyebrow. "So, there's no independent verification that the scent was collected and tracked correctly?" Reynolds hesitated. "That's standard procedure for my unit." "Of course," Mark said smoothly, smiling without warmth. "Just making sure we all understand how trust plays a role here." The courtroom murmured again. The judge banged the gavel. "Order." When the officer stepped down, Clara caught a glimpse of him passing Rex's leash. She noticed the tension in his grip, the way he avoided the dog's eyes. Something about that interaction unsettled her. She looked at Rex again. The animal seemed restless now, tail twitching slightly, head moving from one face to another, as if sensing unease in the air. Hours passed as the courtroom droned with procedures and testimonies, but Clara barely heard any of it. Her mind wandered back to her classroom, the chalk dust, the sound of laughter, Ethan's small voice asking if he could draw during reading time. The memory stabbed at her heart. She hadn't taken him. She knew she hadn't, but no one seemed to care. Not the media, not the police, and not even some of the parents who once greeted her with smiles. Her lawyer leaned closer. "They'll bring Rex forward tomorrow," he whispered. "The prosecution's planning a live demonstration." Clara looked at him sharply. "Tomorrow?" "Yes. They think it'll convince the jury completely." A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "Good," Mark frowned. "Good?" "Clara." She shook her head slowly. "Trust me. If Rex is brought here again, he'll tell them the truth." Mark stared at her, not understanding, but something in her tone made him stop arguing. The judge dismissed the court for the day. As the officers led Clara away, Rex turned his head to follow her movement. Their eyes met once more, hers full of quiet resolve, his reflecting curiosity and something deeper, something almost human. Outside, the town buzzed with gossip. Headlines were already being written. "Beloved teacher or cold-hearted criminal?" Cameras flashed as Clara was guided down the courthouse steps. She didn't respond, didn't shout her innocence. She just whispered under her breath, "Tomorrow, they'll know." Behind her, Officer Reynolds watched, his jaw tight, his mind racing. He knew something Clara didn't. The truth had cracks, and cracks had a way of spreading. Rex sat silently beside him, tail still, eyes following Clara until she disappeared into the police van. For the first time in his career, the loyal police dog let out a low, uncertain whine. And deep inside that old courthouse, where justice was supposed to shine, something unseen had already begun to stir, something that would soon tear the town's faith in truth wide open. The sun rose over Maple Creek with an eerie stillness the next morning, as though the town itself was holding its breath. The courthouse loomed over the square, its stone walls catching the light, looking both proud and tired, a monument to justice. But today, it felt more like a theater. People gathered early, forming a line outside the doors, coffee cups in hand, gossip spilling like wildfire. Some were there for curiosity, others for vengeance. And in the midst of them all, a few held signs that read, "Free Clara Jameson." Clara arrived in a police van, wrists still bound, eyes focused straight ahead. The crowd erupted into shouts, some cruel, some sympathetic. She ignored them all. Inside, she could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. Everyone thought they knew the truth. They didn't. As she stepped into the courtroom again, she could already sense the tension. The prosecutor was seated, flipping through his notes, his face sharp with confidence. Officer Reynolds sat behind him, his posture stiff, his eyes shadowed by unease. Rex lay at his feet again, calm and quiet, though there was a restless flicker in his gaze. Clara noticed it immediately. Mark, her lawyer, leaned over. "You look like you barely slept." "I didn't," she admitted softly. "But that's not what matters." He gave a small sigh, rubbing his temples. "Clara, I have to be honest. The press is destroying you out there. They're calling you the teacher with a secret past." She smiled faintly. "Everyone loves a villain. It sells better than the truth." The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge entered, robe flowing, eyes stern. The murmurs died instantly. "Before we proceed," the judge said, "I remind everyone that decorum must be maintained. This case has drawn attention across the state, but this is still a court of law, not a spectacle." The prosecutor rose first. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to submit new supporting testimony. Records confirming Miss Jameson's car was seen near the park where Ethan Cole disappeared. Additionally, we will proceed today with a demonstration involving Rex to reaffirm the accuracy of our earlier scent findings." Mark's jaw tightened. He had expected this, but it still felt like walking into a trap. He rose calmly. "Your Honor, the defense has no objection to the demonstration, provided it is conducted under fair and controlled circumstances." The judge nodded. "So ordered." Clara sat still, her heartbeat steady but strong. She could feel Rex's presence even across the room, the quiet rhythm of his breathing. She didn't hate him. How could she? He was only doing what he'd been trained to do. The real fault lay with the hands that guided him. The prosecution began by recalling the events of the day Ethan disappeared. They showed photographs on a projector, the school playground, Ethan's smiling face, the small blue backpack that had been found near Clara's car. The images drew gasps from the audience. Vincent Lowell turned toward the jury. "This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. Every piece of evidence leads to one conclusion." He paused for effect before gesturing to the police dog. "Rex is one of the most trusted dogs in law enforcement. His sense of smell can detect truth in ways no human can. When he smelled Ethan's scent, he followed it directly to the defendant's car. He has never been wrong before, and he wasn't wrong that day." The jurors nodded silently. The prosecutor had the room in his hands. Mark stood slowly. "Your Honor, the defense would like to remind the court that no forensic evidence was found in Miss Jameson's vehicle. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing linking Ethan physically to her car. We also request the opportunity to cross-examine Rex's handler after the demonstration." "Granted," said the judge. A faint stir ran through the crowd as the handler, Officer Reynolds, stood. He looked uncomfortable under the gaze of hundreds of eyes. Rex rose with him, alert and focused. The handler brought out a small cloth, Ethan's shirt, sealed in a clear evidence bag. "This is the shirt belonging to the missing child," Reynolds announced, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. Rex has been trained to identify and track the scent associated with this item. Today, he will show you his accuracy. He released Rex, who sniffed the air, eyes narrowing in concentration. Reynolds pointed toward a lineup of identical vehicles, each cleaned and scent neutralized overnight. Only one, according to the official claim, had been associated with the child's scent, Clara's car, now parked among the others. The silence was total. Not a whisper, not a cough. Rex began moving, nose low to the ground, moving from car to car. He paused at one, sniffed, then moved on. The audience leaned forward, every breath synchronized with the dog's movement. When he reached the middle car, the one belonging to Clara, everyone seemed to hold their breath. Rex stopped, hesitated, then sniffed again. His ears twitched. Reynolds gave a subtle gesture with his hand. One Clara's sharp eyes didn't miss. But Rex didn't respond the way the officer expected. Instead of sitting, his signal for a confirmed scent, Rex moved again, circling toward another car at the far end of the lineup. The spectators murmured. The prosecutor frowned, whispering something urgently to Reynolds, who stiffened. Rex sniffed the last car, then gave a sharp bark and sat down. The courtroom erupted in noise. "That's not her car," someone shouted from the back. Mark rose immediately. "Your Honor, the defense requests a pause. This is crucial. The dog has identified the wrong vehicle." The prosecutor's face turned red. The dog must be confused. The lineup was rearranged overnight. "Then perhaps," Mark said coolly, "your procedure wasn't as airtight as you claimed." The judge banged his gavel for silence. "Enough. We'll take a 10-minute recess." As the crowd broke into whispers, Clara sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Rex. He had disobeyed his handler. But why? Instinct? Confusion? Or something deeper? During the recess, reporters flooded the hallway, calling the dog's reaction a shocking twist. The prosecutor barked orders to his assistants, demanding an explanation. Reynolds stood off to the side, beads of sweat rolling down his temple. He avoided Rex's gaze, but the dog kept staring at him, head tilted, eyes piercing. When the session resumed, the judge looked visibly annoyed. "Officer Reynolds," he said, "can you explain the discrepancy in the dog's behavior?" Reynolds hesitated. "Your Honor, Rex is extremely reliable. It's possible the scent faded, or the lineup was contaminated. These things can happen." Mark rose. "Contaminated by whom, officer?" Reynolds stiffened. "By anyone who handled the evidence, including myself." "Interesting," Mark said softly. "So, the person responsible for controlling the evidence may have influenced the scent trail?" "That's not what I said. But it's possible?" Reynolds' silence was enough. The courtroom murmured again. The judge raised a hand. "That's enough for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow." Clara stood as the bailiff approached to escort her out. As she passed Rex, she glanced down at him. The dog lifted his head, meeting her gaze. For the briefest second, everything else, the noise, the people, the flashing lights, faded away. It was just her and Rex. "Fine truth," she whispered under her breath, barely moving her lips. Rex blinked, tail twitching once. Reynolds tugged the leash sharply, pulling him away, but Rex didn't immediately follow. He hesitated, ears perked, gaze still fixed on Clara as she disappeared down the corridor. Outside the courthouse, the air was electric with tension. Reporters shouted questions. Some asked if she'd trained the dog somehow. Others claimed it was proof of divine intervention. Inside his patrol car, Officer Reynolds sat gripping the steering wheel, his mind spinning. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of every lie he'd told pressing against his chest. Rex sat in the back seat, eyes calm but knowing. For the first time, the officer couldn't meet his partner's gaze. Because deep down he knew, dogs might not speak, but sometimes they still told the truth. And this time, the truth was beginning to bark louder than the lies. Morning light spilled through the blinds of the courthouse windows, slicing across the polished floor in quiet golden lines. It was the third day of the trial, but the energy in the room felt entirely different now. Gone was the smug certainty that had filled the air before. Now, whispers moved like wind through the gallery. The town that once believed Clara's guilt beyond question had started to wonder if something darker lurked behind the badge that accused her. Clara sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hadn't slept more than a few hours, but her mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. Every detail of yesterday's chaos replayed in her head. Rex refusing to stop at her car, his bark at the wrong vehicle, the flash of confusion that crossed Officer Reynolds' face. It hadn't been an accident. She was sure of it. Mark sat beside her, flipping through a folder of reports, his tie slightly crooked. "Clara," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "The prosecution's rattled. The media's turning on them. That demonstration yesterday might have saved us more than we realize." Clara nodded slowly, eyes still locked on the empty witness stand. "He didn't pick my car because the scent never belonged there," she said quietly. "They put it there." Mark glanced at her. "You're saying the evidence was planted?" "I'm saying Officer Reynolds has something to hide." He sighed. "It's possible, but suspicion isn't proof. We need something concrete and fast. The prosecution's not going to give up easily. They'll try to spin that demonstration, claim it was an error, or that Rex was tired. They'll blame the dog," Clara said bitterly. "The only one who can't defend himself." The courtroom door opened, and in walked the prosecutor, Vincent Lowell, flanked by Reynolds. The officer's uniform was pressed perfectly, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed him. He avoided looking at Clara. Behind him trotted Rex, calm as ever, leash in hand, though there was something different about the dog's demeanor. He wasn't alert or eager. He was quiet, thoughtful, watching every movement, every sound. As court came to order, the judge looked more weary than stern. "Before we continue," he began, "I have reviewed the events of yesterday's demonstration. While the dog's behavior raised questions, it does not, in itself, constitute evidence of misconduct. However, given the irregularities, I have requested the presence of an independent animal behaviorist to evaluate Rex's reliability." A man in his 50s stood from the gallery, nodding politely. "Dr. Halpern, Your Honor," he introduced himself. "I've worked with scent detection dogs for over 20 years. I'll provide an unbiased assessment." Lowell objected immediately. "Your Honor, we can't delay proceedings for—" "You will sit down, Mr. Lowell," Judge Harper interrupted firmly. "This court will determine the truth, not merely a conviction." The audience murmured in approval. For the first time, Clara saw the judge's expression soften when his gaze fell on her. Dr. Halpern approached Rex slowly, crouching to meet the dog's eyes. He spoke softly, tested a few commands, and stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, the dog's training appears intact. His responses are precise. However, I noticed something unusual. He's reacting to his handler's body language rather than the scent itself. This means that he's unreliable." Lowell interjected. Halpern shook his head. "No, it means someone has conditioned him to associate certain cues with expected results. Dogs like Rex don't make mistakes. People do." The room fell silent. Mark stood. "Are you suggesting that Officer Reynolds may have unconsciously influenced the dog during the investigation?" "I'm suggesting it's possible," Halpern said carefully. "If the handler wanted a particular outcome, even subtle tension in the leash or a visual cue could steer the dog." The prosecutor's jaw clenched. "That's speculation. But it's a scientific fact, the expert replied evenly. And yesterday's demonstration supports it. Rex followed honest scent work, and it led away from the defendant. The defense table exchanged glances. Clara exhaled slowly, her pulse thudding in her ears. For the first time since her arrest, the tide was shifting. Lowell, visibly frustrated, stood to call his next witness. The prosecution calls Officer Reynolds back to the stand. Reynolds moved stiffly to the witness box, his expression guarded. He swore the oath with a voice that barely carried. "Officer," Lowell began, forcing an easy tone, "you've worked with Rex for how long?" 5 years. And in that time, has he ever failed to identify the correct trail? No. So how do you explain his behavior yesterday? Reynolds hesitated. Dogs can get confused. Maybe the lineup was contaminated. Mark rose for cross-examination, almost before the judge nodded. "Officer Reynolds, who arranged that car lineup?" "I did." "And who was responsible for storing Ethan Cole's shirt?" "I was." Mark tilted his head. "So the key pieces of evidence, the scent article and the lineup, were entirely under your control?" "Yes, but no further questions." The defense attorney sat down, leaving the implication hanging in the air like smoke. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs again, and the judge called for quiet. Clara glanced at Reynolds. His composure was slipping. A bead of sweat trailed down his temple. Rex, sitting near the witness stand, was watching him intently. The dog's gaze didn't waver once. When the recess was announced, reporters surged toward the exits, their voices rising with speculation. Mark closed his briefcase and turned to Clara. "We've got him rattled. It's only a matter of time before he slips." Clara nodded, her eyes still locked on Reynolds, who had retreated to a quiet corner with the prosecutor. She could almost see the cracks forming in his armor, the way his hands shook slightly, the tremor in his jaw. Outside, the autumn wind whipped through the courthouse steps. The crowd had grown even larger, their voices colliding in confusion, some shouting for justice, others chanting her name in support. For a woman who had spent her life teaching children kindness and honesty, being painted as a criminal felt surreal. But she refused to let anger consume her. That evening, back in her holding cell, she sat on the small bed, staring at the blank wall. The faint hum of fluorescent light buzzed above her. Her mind refused to rest. Every memory of Ethan's last day played like a movie. He had stayed after class, drawing a picture for his mother, a stick-figure family holding hands under a sun. She remembered ruffling his hair and saying goodbye. Then she'd watched him run toward the gate, smiling. That was the last time she saw him. "Find truth," she whispered again, recalling how the words had stirred Rex yesterday. There was power in them. She didn't know why, but somehow the dog understood her. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was because she spoke with belief, not command. The next morning, before the trial resumed, something unexpected happened. Dr. Halpern requested a private session with the judge to review Rex's behavior again. Clara and Mark were permitted to attend. Reynolds and Lowell arrived soon after, visibly uneasy. Halpern placed a fresh scent item on the floor, a piece of Ethan's clothing taken directly from police storage, under court supervision. No one but the judge knew which of the identical bags held the genuine article. "Rex," Halpern commanded gently, "find truth." The dog sniffed the air, his body stiffening. He began moving, past the first bag, the second, then stopped abruptly at the third. He barked once, sharply, and sat down beside it. Halpern checked the list. The third bag was the real one. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. That command, "Find truth," where did that come from? Halpern frowned slightly. The dog must have heard it before. He recognized it instantly. Clara's heart pounded. "Because I said it," she whispered. Reynolds paled, his hand gripping the table. The judge's eyes flicked to him. "Officer, is there something you'd like to explain?" But Reynolds said nothing. He simply lowered his gaze, sweat beading at his collar. The silence stretched unbearably long until Rex broke it with a sudden bark. Sharp and direct, staring straight at his handler. In that moment, even the prosecutor seemed to lose color. The judge ended the session abruptly, ordering a review of all evidence custody logs. As they left the room, Clara caught a glimpse of Reynolds outside the door, leaning heavily against the wall, his face ghost white. Rex stood near him, unmoving, as if waiting. The first domino had fallen, and deep inside the courthouse, a quiet certainty began to form in Clara's chest. The truth was no longer hiding. It was finally finding its scent. ChatGPT said the courtroom was packed the next morning, the kind of crowd that smelled of tension and curiosity. Every seat was taken. Reporters lined the back walls, cameras ready, notebooks open. The case had gripped the entire state, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Clara sat beside her lawyer, Mark Daniels, pale but composed, her eyes fixed on the floor. She hadn't spoken much since the last session. Each day seemed heavier than the one before, but today felt different. There was something in the air. Rex was already there, sitting obediently beside Officer Reynolds, the officer in charge of handling the police K-9 unit. The golden retriever looked calm, his tail curled neatly around his paws, eyes sharp and watchful. He'd been in that courtroom before, during demonstrations of the investigation, but never had he seemed so alert. He was waiting for something, though no one could tell what. The judge entered, gavel in hand. "Court is now in session," he said firmly. "This is day 11 of the state versus Clara Jennings. Prosecution, you may proceed." The district attorney, a broad-shouldered man named Porter, stood confidently. "Your Honor," he began, "today we intend to close our case. We'll review the evidence one final time, the fingerprints, the eyewitness testimony, and most importantly, the canine tracking results." He motioned toward Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds, if you would, please." Reynolds stood, leading Rex to the center of the courtroom. His uniform was pressed, his demeanor composed, but something about his eyes betrayed unease. He avoided looking directly at Clara. "Officer," Porter said, "for the record, please describe how your K-9 unit located the weapon." Reynolds cleared his throat. "We used Rex to track from the scene. He followed a scent from the victim's clothing, leading us to a wooded area near Ms. Jennings' property. There, Rex indicated the presence of the weapon, a kitchen knife. The DNA on that knife matched the victim's blood and the defendant's fingerprints." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Porter smiled faintly. "So to clarify, your dog led you directly to the murder weapon, and evidence later confirmed Ms. Jennings' connection to it?" "Yes, sir." The prosecution sat, satisfied. It was a strong statement, airtight, on paper. But Mark stood slowly, his calm composure hiding the storm beneath. "Your Honor," he said, "may I cross-examine?" The judge nodded. Mark approached Reynolds, voice smooth as silk. "Officer Reynolds, how long have you worked with Rex?" 6 years. "And in those 6 years, how would you describe your relationship?" Reynolds glanced down at Rex. "He's my partner. We trust each other." "Trust," Mark repeated. "Interesting word." He paused. "Tell me, officer, how does a K-9 indicate a discovery?" Reynolds hesitated. "Through body language, barking, pawing, or sitting to signal the location of an object." Mark nodded. "So, when Rex found the knife, he indicated by sitting?" "Yes. And you're certain that's what happened?" Reynolds blinked, the faintest tremor in his voice. "Yes," Mark smiled slightly. "Strange. Because in your written report, you said Rex barked to signal." "Which is it?" Did he bark or sit? A quiet rustle went through the crowd. Porter frowned, flipping through papers. Reynolds stammered. I might have written it wrong in the report. It was a long day. Understandable, Mark said easily. Stressful work. But I wonder how could such an experienced handler mistake the exact indication method of his own partner? Reynolds' jaw clenched. It was an honest error. Mark leaned closer. Was it? The judge rapped his gavel lightly. Mr. Daniels, stay on point. I'm getting there, Your Honor, Mark said, pacing slowly. Officer Reynolds, would you say Rex is loyal to you? Of course. Would he ever respond differently if he sensed your anxiety or direction? Reynolds frowned. Dogs read their handlers, yes, but they don't fabricate evidence. Unless, Mark said softly, they're being led intentionally or not. Reynolds' face reddened. I did no such thing. Mark stopped, letting the silence hang. The jury was listening intently now. Clara looked up for the first time, her heart pounding. Mark turned toward the judge. Your Honor, the defense requests to bring Rex forward for a brief demonstration. Porter objected immediately. This is absurd, but the judge raised a hand. I'll allow it. Proceed, Mr. Daniels. Mark motioned toward the bailiff, who unhooked Rex's leash and guided him to the center of the courtroom. The dog sat, calm and steady, eyes following Mark as he approached. Mark knelt to meet Rex's gaze. You've done this before, haven't you? He said softly. Then, louder, Your Honor, I've brought 2 objects from Miss Jennings' home, one belonging to her, one not. I'd like to see which scent Rex identifies as familiar. Porter scoffed, but the judge waved him silent. Proceed. Mark placed both object Stu's scarves on the floor, several feet apart. Rex looked between them, then turned to Reynolds, waiting for instruction. Reynolds gave a subtle signal, too subtle for most to notice, but Clara saw it. A tiny tilt of the chin. Rex moved toward the right-hand scarf, sniffed it, then sat. Mark nodded. Now let's try something else. He lifted the scarf, switched positions when no one was paying close attention, and stepped back. Again, officer, would you please stand back this time? No commands. Reynolds hesitated. He won't respond properly without... Let's see, Mark said firmly. Reynolds stepped back reluctantly. Rex blinked, ears twitching. He looked between the 2 scarves again. Then slowly, he went to the opposite one and sat. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Mark stood, voice sharp now. So, without the handler's influence, Rex indicated differently, meaning his first signal could have been guided, unintentionally, perhaps, or intentionally. Reynolds stiffened. You're twisting this. Am I? Mark turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense argues that the canine evidence central to the prosecution's case cannot be trusted as unbiased. Dogs respond to their handlers' cues. If Officer Reynolds believed Ms. Jennings was guilty, he could have subconsciously directed Rex to confirm that belief. Porter shot to his feet. Speculation. But the damage was done. The jurors were whispering among themselves. The once solid foundation of the prosecution's case was cracking. Clara's pulse raced. For the first time, she saw hope flicker in the judge's eyes. Mark turned back to the dog, voice gentler now. Rex, he said softly, show me the truth. The golden retriever's ears perked. His gaze darted to Reynolds, who shifted uneasily under the scrutiny of 100 eyes. Something in the dog's expression changed. His body went rigid, tail stiff. He gave a low, uncertain growl. Reynolds froze. What's wrong, officer? Mark asked quietly. Reynolds' voice cracked. He's never done that before. Maybe, Mark said softly. He's finally telling the truth. The courtroom was silent, utterly still. Then, without warning, Rex stood, turned from the scarves, and walked toward the witness stand where Reynolds had been earlier. He sniffed the ground near the officer's briefcase, then pawed it once, twice, and sat down firmly. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Officer, what's in that briefcase?" "Just paperwork." Reynolds barked. "You can't," but the judge's voice cut through sharply. "Bailiff, open it." The bailiff hesitated only a moment before unbuckling the latches. Inside was a sealed evidence bag, one that contained a blood-stained glove. Gasps filled the courtroom. Porter's face went pale. That evidence was supposed to be logged weeks ago. Mark's voice was calm but cold. Yet somehow it was sitting in the officer's briefcase. Reynolds stammered, his composure crumbling. It wasn't what it looks like, but Rex had already risen again, barking once, sharp, clear, and certain. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge pounded his gavel, shouting for order, but no one heard. In that single haunting moment, everyone in the room understood. The dog hadn't just found truth, he had revealed a lie. And Clara, tears in her eyes, realized that maybe, just maybe, justice had finally started to listen. The room was electric. The moment Clara whispered those two words, "Find truth," the air shifted. Even before anyone understood what was happening, the police dog, Rex, began to move. His muscles tensed, his head lifted, and his sharp eyes darted not toward Clara, but across the courtroom. A low rumble grew in his chest, and then he barked, once, twice, louder each time, his gaze fixed on Officer Reynolds. The sound echoed off the wooden panels like thunder. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps and shouts filled the air as people craned their necks to see. Reporters stumbled over each other, pens flying from hands. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, shouting for order. But it was useless for several moments. The dog's behavior had set off a storm of confusion and fear. Rex ignored the noise. He pulled hard at his leash, trying to move toward Reynolds. The officer froze, his face pale, his body stiff as stone. "Sit, Rex, sit." He barked, but the dog didn't obey. Instead, Rex growled again, deep and guttural, the kind of sound that comes not from anger, but certainty. "Officer, control your animal." The prosecutor shouted, but his voice cracked slightly, betraying his own unease. The judge finally slammed his gavel so hard, the sound cracked through the uproar. "Order! Order in this court!" The bailiffs moved quickly, approaching Rex cautiously. Clara stood still, her face pale but calm. She didn't move, didn't speak again, but her eyes stayed locked on the dog. The courtroom began to quiet down, though a hum of whispers still buzzed through the benches. Rex barked again, one final time, and then sat down directly facing Reynolds. His ears pinned back, his gaze unwavering. The silence that followed was suffocating. What is the meaning of this?" the judge demanded. Reynolds's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Rex, then at Clara, his expression caught between confusion and dread. Sweat formed on his forehead. The defense attorney, Mark, slowly stood. "Your Honor," he said softly, "it appears Rex has chosen a new focus of attention. I'd like to request a moment to clarify this demonstration's result." The prosecutor slammed his folder shut. "This is absurd. The defendant must have used some trick or—" Mark turned sharply. "Are you suggesting she somehow trained a police canine from her jail cell?" Laughter rippled through the gallery, quickly hushed by the judge's glare. "Enough!" the judge barked. "Everyone, sit down. Bailiff, remove the dog for now. This court will reconvene in 15 minutes. Officer Reynolds, remain where you are." The tension was thick enough to choke on. As the courtroom emptied into the hallways, the air was full of speculation. Reporters crowded near the doors, whispering. The dog turned on his handler. "Did you see Reynolds's face? Something's not right here." Clara sat quietly, her heart pounding, but her expression unreadable. When Mark leaned close, she finally spoke in a low voice, only he could hear. "He knows now. Rex found it." "Found what?" "The truth," she said simply, eyes glinting. In the judge's chambers, away from the cameras and murmurs, the tension only grew. The judge looked between the prosecutor, the defense, and Reynolds, who sat rigid in his chair. Rex, now calmer, sat nearby with another handler, watching closely. "Officer Reynolds," the judge began, "you were directly responsible for the evidence and the dog's training. Given this unusual incident, I'm ordering an internal review of your procedures." "That's unnecessary," Reynolds blurted out. "The dog was just confused." He's tired." "Confused?" the judge said, voice low and dangerous. "I've seen dogs react in many ways, officer, but I've never seen one ignore his handler entirely." Reynolds said nothing. His eyes darted briefly to Rex, then away again. Mark seized the opportunity. "Your Honor, I would request that all scent evidence collected by Officer Reynolds be suspended pending verification. This case hinges on that evidence, and at this point, it's clearly compromised." The judge nodded slowly. "Agreed. Until the internal review is complete, that evidence is inadmissible." The prosecutor began to object, but the judge's sharp look silenced him. Clara was escorted back to her seat, the recess ending. As the jury filed in, the buzz in the room was deafening. Everyone could feel the momentum had changed. The prosecutor, red-faced, tried to salvage the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, voice tight, "I remind you that a dog's behavior, while impressive, is not proof of guilt or innocence. We must rely on facts, hard evidence." Mark stood before he could finish. "Exactly. Facts. And the only person who controlled those facts was Officer Reynolds." The crowd stirred again. As the questioning resumed, Reynolds was called back to the stand. He looked exhausted, his uniform rumpled, his confidence gone. Mark approached with quiet intensity. "Officer Reynolds," he began, "how long have you worked with Rex?" "5 years," Reynolds muttered. "And in that time, has he ever ignored your commands?" "No, until today." Reynolds's jaw clenched. It was a mistake." Mark paced slowly. "And yet, when the defendant someone Rex has only seen once before spoke 2 words, he immediately changed his behavior. He disobeyed you and directed his attention to you." "That doesn't mean anything," Reynolds snapped. Mark smiled faintly. "Doesn't it?" He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I request that Rex's training logs and evidence handling records be submitted for review? I believe we'll find inconsistencies." The judge nodded, signaling the bailiff to collect them. Reynolds's hands trembled as he handed over the files. When Mark sat down, Clara leaned slightly toward him. "He's scared," she whispered. "Good," Mark replied quietly. "Fear cracks walls faster than truth sometimes." As the afternoon stretched on, the tension only grew. The judge announced that the hearing would pause for the day while the records were examined. The jurors were dismissed, and the courtroom began to empty. But as Reynolds walked out, Rex stopped at the doorway and turned, his body stiffening again. He looked back at Clara, then at Reynolds, and let out one low, unmistakable growl. That sound lingered long after the doors closed. Later that evening, back at the precinct, investigators began to dig into the case logs. What they found was subtle but damning. Timestamps that didn't match. Scent items checked out longer than protocol allowed. And a security video from the evidence room showing Reynolds entering alone after hours the night before the initial search. The next morning, whispers turned into headlines. Corruption in the Maple Creek Police Department? Evidence mishandled in missing child case? Inside the courtroom, the mood had transformed completely. The same people who once looked at Clara with suspicion now watched her with curiosity, even sympathy. She sat straight-backed, composed, while Reynolds fidgeted at the stand. Mark wasted no time. "Officer Reynolds," he said firmly, "records show you were in the evidence room at 2:43 a.m. the night before the search. Can you explain why?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "I was double-checking the chain of custody." "Alone?" "Yes. And without logging your entry?" I forgot." Mark's tone sharpened. "You forgot to follow procedure in the most high-profile case this town has ever seen." Reynolds didn't answer. The judge's brow furrowed. "Officer, you'd better think carefully about your next words." The room waited, breaths held, for the breaking point. Rex sat quietly beside another officer, watching his old handler with those unblinking amber eyes. Finally, Reynolds spoke, but his voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said. Mark leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Reynolds' hand shook as he rubbed his face. "I didn't hurt that boy. There was an accident. My nephew. Officer Reynolds," the judge interrupted, "you are now under oath. If you have information about the disappearance of Ethan Cole, you will share it fully." Tears welled in the man's eyes. "My nephew hit him with the car. It was an accident. I panicked. I thought if I blamed someone, if I made it look like Clara was guilty, no one would look any deeper. I thought I could protect him." The courtroom erupted again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was outrage. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked even though they weren't allowed. Clara sat frozen, tears streaming silently down her face. And through it all, Rex didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on Reynolds, his chest rising and falling in calm, steady rhythm. For the first time, Clara truly smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from victory, but from the relief of being believed. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You found it, didn't you?" Rex's ears twitched, as if he heard. The courtroom had witnessed lies, manipulation, and shame, but in the end, it was a dog's silent truth that tore through it all. The city was quiet the night before the final hearing. Judge Lawson sat alone in his hotel room, the city lights stretching across the horizon like a blanket of gold. It had been 6 months since that morning in Millstone, the day the little boy's words had shattered the silence. In that time, the country had changed. Investigations had spread across multiple states. Dozens of officials had resigned or been arrested. The justice system, once a fortress of untouchable authority, now stood trembling before the people it had long ignored. But with the truth came danger. 3 witnesses tied to the Millstone case had vanished without a trace. Anonymous threats had arrived daily, some mailed, some whispered through calls that never showed a number. Even within the walls of Washington, there were those who wanted the case buried for good. Lawson turned off the television, its endless coverage of hearings filling the room with static. On the nightstand lay a single folded letter, Emily's handwriting neat and steady. She had sent it 2 days earlier. "Noah starts school next week," it read. "He keeps saying he'll tell his teacher about his dad and the brave judge who saved him. Be safe. Come home soon." He folded it back carefully and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't know if he'd get the chance to go home again. At dawn, he walked toward the Capitol, the sky still heavy with mist. The corridors were lined with guards and reporters. Inside the main chamber, seats filled quickly politicians, journalists, and families of the fallen. Cameras turned toward the witness table where Lawson sat, calm but pale. Across from him sat the special prosecutor appointed to lead the final phase of the inquiry. A sharp-eyed woman named Miriam Vega. "Judge Lawson," she began. "Today's hearing marks the end of the Millstone investigation's first chapter. Before we move forward, we ask that you read your closing statement into the record." He nodded, unfolding a sheet of paper. His voice was low, but steady as it filled the hall. "For years, I believed justice was a system and institution guarded by laws and procedures. But I was wrong. Justice is not found in books or buildings. It's found in people, in those who dare to speak when silence is easier, in those who risk everything to protect the truth." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Officer Carter tried to tell the truth. Darren Tate tried to expose it. They both paid the price for our silence. Today, I stand not just for them, but for every person who ever believed the law would protect them and learned it would not. We owe them more than apologies. We owe them change. The room was silent for a long time. When he finished, the audience rose to its feet in quiet applause. Vega's expression softened slightly as she said, "Thank you, Judge Lawson. Your courage will not be forgotten." But even as the hearing adjourned, he felt unease gnawing at him. Something was wrong. As he stepped outside into the marble hall, his phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Don't go back to the hotel. They're coming for you." He froze. The corridor suddenly felt narrower, the guard's eyes sharper. He turned toward the exit, but a group of suited men blocked his path. One of them, tall and cold-eyed, spoke quietly. "Judge Lawson, you've said enough." He recognized the face agent Moreland, supposedly from the task force. But his badge was missing. Lawson took a step back. "You're not federal." Moreland smiled faintly. "No, we're cleanup." The hall echoed with the sound of footsteps as he backed away, searching for another exit. Just then, Rachel appeared at the far end, waving him toward her. "This way," she shouted. He ran, heart pounding, as the men drew their weapons. A shot rang out, shattering a marble pillar. Screams filled the hall. They burst through a side door and into the service corridor. Rachel led him down the stairs toward the underground garage. "They've compromised the detail," she said breathlessly. "We have to get to the press building. If we can get you live on air, they can't touch you." He nodded, adrenaline flooding his body. They sprinted through the dimly lit garage toward her car. Behind them, more footsteps echoed. Bullets sparked against concrete. Lawson ducked behind a pillar, firing a warning shot with the small revolver an agent had slipped him weeks earlier. "Go!" Rachel shouted. "I'll hold them off." He hesitated. "I'm not leaving you." She shoved the car keys into his hand. "You have to finish this. Get the truth out, Judge. Don't let them bury it." He met her eyes for a moment, then ran. Tires screeched as he sped out of the garage, glass shattering behind him. He could still see her figure in the rearview mirror, standing defiantly with her gun raised. By the time he reached the broadcasting building, police cars had surrounded it. He jumped out and flashed his ID. "Judge Lawson." One officer recognized him. "Sir, we saw the footage. Are you hurt?" "No," he said, breathless. "But they'll be here soon. I need a live feed now." Within minutes, the news station was broadcasting his voice across the country. Standing before the camera, rain soaking his coat, Lawson spoke directly to the nation. The corruption uncovered in Millstone was never local. It was a symptom of something larger, a system built to protect power, not people. "I release now the final documents linking the case to federal funding misuse and judicial bribery across multiple states." He placed a flash drive on the podium. "This is not about me. It's about every person who trusted justice and found betrayal instead. Today, we end that silence." As he finished, loud sirens blared outside. Through the studio window, He saw black SUVs pulling up, but this time they weren't alone. Dozens of news vans and federal agents were there too. The ambush had failed. The whole world was watching. Within hours, arrests rippled through the system. The conspirators who had tried to silence him were exposed on live television. Coleman, Reynolds, and others pleaded for deals that would not come. Even Moreland, the fake agent, was caught trying to flee the capital. When it was over, Lawson finally allowed himself to breathe. Exhaustion hit him like a wave. Reporters swarmed, but he said nothing more. The truth no longer needed his words. It had its own voice now. Days later, he returned to Millstone. The courthouse stood boarded up, awaiting renovation. Emily met him outside, Noah clutching her hand. When the boy saw him, he ran forward, arms wide. "Judge!" he shouted. Lawson bent down, smiling as he lifted the child into his arms. "Hey there, buddy. You've gotten taller." Noah giggled. "Mom says you stopped the bad guys." He glanced at Emily, who smiled softly. "We all did," she said. They walked to the park where Carter's memorial now stood, a simple stone engraved with the words, "He spoke the truth when others wouldn't." Flowers surrounded its base. The town had changed. People greeted Lawson with nods and quiet respect. The fear that once hung in the air had been replaced by something else, hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily turned to him. "So, what will you do now?" He looked at the courthouse in the distance, its roof gleaming under the fading light. "Maybe rebuild," he said. "But not as a judge. As someone who listens." She nodded. "That sounds right." Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Can the dog come too?" Lawson laughed softly. "Yeah, kid. The dog comes too." For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt the storm lift from his chest. The air smelled of rain, but also of renewal. He looked up at the sky clear, vast, endless, and realized that justice was never about punishment or revenge. It was about truth surviving the storm. And for the first time, it had. He closed his eyes as the wind swept through the park, carrying away the last echoes of fear. Somewhere, in the distance, a siren wailed not in alarm, but in promise. The town of Millstone had been scarred, but not broken. Its people had found their voices again. And as the night settled over the quiet streets, the story of the judge, the child, and the truth that refused to die became more than just headlines. It became a lesson whispered in classrooms, written in newspapers, and remembered in the hearts of everyone who had once been afraid to speak. Because sometimes justice doesn't begin with power. It begins with a 3-year-old pointing at a dog and saying 2 simple words that made the world stop and listen. The next morning dawned quiet and golden, the kind of morning Clara once loved before everything changed. Birds chattered outside her window, the smell of dew and lilac drifting in through the open curtain. For the first time in a long while, she woke without fear. No courtroom walls, no whispers behind her name, just light, warmth, and the soft rhythm of Rex's breathing beside the bed. She lay there for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, feeling the unfamiliar weight of peace settle over her. Then, with a slow breath, she sat up. Rex lifted his head, yawning before stretching out his paws. "Morning, partner," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. "Ready for a walk?" His tail thumped once, answer enough. They took their usual route through Maple Creek's park, though usual had only become true again these past few weeks. People smiled now when they saw her. Some waved, others simply nodded. She could tell it wasn't pity anymore. It was respect. The town that once condemned her now carried quiet shame, but also admiration. A little girl broke away from her mother and ran up to them. "Miss Clara," she called, grinning wide. "Is that the real hero dog?" Clara laughed, crouching to meet her. "He's just Rex," she said gently. "But yes, he's the one." The girl giggled and petted Rex's head. "He's so soft. My dad says he's braver than any policeman." Rex wagged his tail, leaning into her small hand. Clara's chest tightened with warmth. "He's brave because he listens," she said softly. "That's what real courage is." The girl's mother caught up, offering an apologetic smile. "Sorry, Miss Jennings. She's been wanting to meet you for weeks." "It's all right," Clara said with a smile. "It's good to see children smiling again." As they walked on, the park slowly came alive with chatter and laughter. Spring had truly taken hold. But beneath the brightness, Clara still carried the memory of what had been lost, the boy who would never play here again, the innocence the town had shattered in its rush to blame. That afternoon, she visited the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the creek. A new headstone gleamed softly in the sunlight. Ethan Cole, beloved son, forever remembered. She knelt down, setting a small bunch of daisies against the stone. Rex sat quietly beside her, tail still. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered, "for not being able to protect you, for being part of the world that forgot to look harder." Her voice trembled. "But I promise, we'll keep telling your story. The truth won't be buried again." Rex shifted slightly, pressing his head against her arm. She smiled weakly. "You remember him too, don't you? You smelled where he'd gone. You just needed someone to listen." They sat there a while longer, until the shadows stretched long and the sun began to dip. In town, people were already preparing for something special, a community event organized to honor Rex's service. The mayor had decided that Maple Creek needed healing, and what better symbol than the golden retriever who refused to obey lies. Posters hung in shop windows with his photo, and the words, "Truth finds its way." Clara didn't want attention, but she couldn't deny what Rex had done meant something bigger than either of them. The whole country had seen the trial. News stations still aired documentaries about the dog that broke the case. Universities invited behavioral experts to talk about canine intuition and justice. But for Clara, all of that felt far away from what mattered. Rex hadn't solved the case for fame. He'd done it because he couldn't lie. The day of the ceremony arrived warm and bright. The town square was filled with people, families, police officers, reporters, even students from Clara's old school. A small stage had been built, draped in blue and gold ribbons. When Clara arrived, the crowd broke into applause that rolled like thunder. She froze for a moment at the edge, overwhelmed. But then she felt Rex nudge her hand gently, grounding her. "Come on," she murmured, smiling. "Looks like they're waiting for you." The mayor stepped up to the microphone, his voice echoing over the square. "Today, we gather not just to honor a remarkable dog, but to remind ourselves what justice truly means. When the system faltered, when bias clouded judgment, one loyal soul stayed true. Rex didn't care about appearances, rumors, or rank. He cared only about truth." He turned toward Clara and smiled. "And Miss Jennings, your courage and grace through all of this have shown Maple Creek what forgiveness looks like. You remind us that truth isn't just found, it's lived." As the crowd clapped again, the mayor knelt and fastened a small medal around Rex's collar, a silver medallion engraved with the words for courage and truth. Rex wagged his tail politely, more interested in the attention than the honor. Clara laughed softly through her tears. "You're officially a hero now," she whispered, leaning down to kiss the top of his head. After the ceremony, people gathered around her, offering kind words and hugs. It was overwhelming, but different this time, sincere, almost reverent. The children crowded around Rex, taking turns petting him while he sat patiently like a king surrounded by admirers. That evening, when the town square had emptied and the lights dimmed, Clara and Rex walked home together under a sky painted with stars. She looked up at the constellations, thinking of everything that had happened, the fear, the trial, the betrayal, the redemption. "You know," she said softly, "they're calling you a miracle." Rex gave a low, content huff. "But I think the miracle wasn't what you did," she continued. "It was that you reminded people how to listen again. Not just to dogs or evidence, but to their own hearts." They reached the old wooden bridge over the creek. The water beneath shimmered in the moonlight, whispering softly as it flowed. Clara leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air. "I thought truth was something you fought for," she said. "But maybe it's something you protect. Something you keep alive, even when everyone else buries it." Rex stood beside her, quiet and still. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The world seemed at peace. As days turned into weeks, life began to settle into a gentle rhythm. Clara returned to teaching, starting with part-time lessons at the community center. The children adored Rex, who had become something of a mascot, always patient, always alert. Sometimes Clara would catch him staring at the door, as if waiting for someone unseen. She liked to believe he was remembering Ethan, keeping watch the way he always had. One afternoon, after class, Mark stopped by the school. He leaned against the doorway, smiling. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she admitted. "For the first time, I really am." He nodded. "You deserve it. Both of you." He reached down to scratch Rex behind the ears. "You know, I think you've both taught this town more about justice than any of us lawyers ever could." Clara smiled softly. "Justice isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about truth. And truth always has a way of showing up, even if it takes time." That evening, as the sun set over Maple Creek, Clara stood on her porch, looking out across the fields. Rex lay beside her, his golden fur glowing in the fading light. The world felt whole again. She whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" Rex's ears perked, and he let out a soft, contented bark. And for the first time in a long time, Clara believed completely not just in truth, but in the quiet, steadfast goodness of the world. The kind that can't be silenced, no matter how deep it's buried. Months passed, and Maple Creek slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. A town that had once been fractured now began to heal. But the echoes of Clara's story never really faded. People still talked about the trial in hushed tones at the diner. Still pointed out the courthouse when tourists passed through. Still told the story of the teacher and the dog who spoke truth. Clara never sought fame, but the world seemed to keep finding her. Letters arrived weekly, some from strangers who had seen the televised trial, others from parents thanking her for inspiring their children to believe in honesty again. There were invitations from universities, talk shows, even book publishers. But she turned them all down. She didn't want to turn tragedy into spectacle. She wanted peace, and she wanted Rex to have it too. One crisp autumn morning, she sat on her porch sipping tea, the mug warm between her hands. Rex lay at her feet, eyes half closed, soaking up the pale sunlight. The leaves had begun to change, flames of gold and amber painting the street. The wind carried that sweet, earthy smell of the season. She watched the town waking up, the mailman waving, children running toward the schoolyard, laughter echoing down the road. It was a simple life again, and she was grateful for every heartbeat of it. "Hard to believe, huh?" she said softly to Rex. "After everything we've been through." He blinked up at her lazily, as if to say, "I believed it all along." She smiled. "I guess you did." A knock came at the door. When she opened it, she found Mark standing there, coat collar turned up against the chill, holding a stack of papers and a familiar sheepish smile. "Morning," he said. "I didn't want to bother you too early." "You never bother me," she said, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked in, looking around the little house as if it were still new to him. The faint smell of cinnamon filled the air from the tea on the counter. Rex wagged his tail in greeting before flopping back down by the fireplace. Mark set the papers on the table. "You got another letter," he said. "This one's from the Department of Justice." Clara raised a brow. "Oh, what now?" He smiled. "It's good news. They've decided to officially clear your record completely expunged. It's like it never happened." She stared at him for a moment, processing the words. Even though she'd been declared innocent, a shadow had always lingered the records, the digital traces, the whispers in databases that said, "suspect once." And now, all of that would be gone. "Just like that?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Just like that. You're free in every sense." Clara exhaled slowly, a deep, shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for years. "I don't even know what to say." "Say nothing," Mark said gently. "Just live." She smiled faintly, tears stinging her eyes. "That's the plan." They sat for a while, sipping tea, a crackle of the fire filling the silence. It was a warm silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Later, when Mark left, Clara stood at the window watching him drive away, the golden leaves swirling behind his car. Life was starting to feel like hers. Again, not something she was surviving, but something she was living. The weeks rolled by peacefully. Clara returned fully to teaching, this time at the town's new education center. Her students adored her, not just because she'd been on the news, but because she taught with something deeper, with understanding. She told them stories of truth, courage, and the importance of seeing with both the eyes and the heart. Rex was never far from her side. He became something of a legend among the kids. They'd take turns reading to him, and somehow, he always seemed to choose the child who needed confidence the most, resting his head in their lap as if saying, "I believe in you." But as winter drew near, Clara began to notice small changes. Rex was slowing down. His steps grew heavier, his naps longer. He still wagged his tail every time she entered the room, but his energy was fading. She tried not to think about it. Dogs grow old. That's just life. But the thought gnawed at her heart. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside, she sat beside him by the fireplace. His golden fur shimmered in the flickering light, his breathing slow and even. She stroked his head gently, tears pricking at her eyes. "You saved my life," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you for that." His tail thumped weakly once against the rug. She smiled through her tears. "You don't have to stay and watch over me forever, you know. I'll be okay now. You can rest when you need to." He gave a soft sigh, eyes closing, and she leaned her forehead against his. "I'll love you forever, Rex, always." That night, he slept soundly. The next morning, when the sun rose, he didn't wake. Clara found him lying peacefully by the fire, his medal still glinting faintly on his collar. The stillness was too perfect, too gentle for pain. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling, and for a long time, she couldn't cry. She just sat there, stroking his fur, whispering his name again and again. When she finally did cry, it was not just for loss, but for love, for all the light he had brought into her darkness. The town mourned with her. The mayor offered to have Rex buried at the park, beside a small bronze statue the community had built of him months earlier. On the day of the burial, nearly everyone came. The children brought flowers, the police department sent a guard of honor, and Clara placed Rex's medal gently beside him. As the crowd bowed their heads, the wind picked up softly, scattering golden leaves over his grave. Clara spoke quietly, her voice breaking. "He showed us what truth looks like. It's loyal. It's patient. It never gives up." She paused, smiling faintly through tears. And sometimes it comes on 4 legs. The crowd was silent for a long moment, and someone began to clap softly. Others joined until the air was filled with the sound of applause, not loud, but pure, full of gratitude. Afterward, when everyone had left, Clara remained. She knelt by the small mound of earth and traced her fingers over the engraved stone that read, "Rex, loyal friend, guardian of truth, he listened when no one else would." Snow began to fall again, thin and slow. She sat there until it covered the ground around her, her heart heavy but peaceful. In the weeks that followed, life moved forward, as it always does. But Clara carried Rex's spirit everywhere. Sometimes she swore she could still hear the soft pad of his paws when she walked through the house at night. One spring morning, while teaching her class, a young boy raised his hand. "Miss Clara," he asked, "do you think dogs go to heaven?" She smiled softly, glancing out the window where the sunlight filtered through the trees. "I think," she said, "they go wherever the truth goes. And that's always somewhere beautiful." The children smiled, and class went on. That evening, she walked alone to the park. The flowers around Rex's statue were blooming, a riot of colors against the fresh green grass. She sat on the bench nearby, watching the creek shimmer in the fading light. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I told the world your story." The breeze stirred gently, and for a moment she could almost feel the warmth of his fur against her hand. She closed her eyes, smiling through the ache. Somewhere deep inside, she knew he was still watching, still guarding her, still reminding her to listen always to the quiet voice of truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maple Creek glowed softly in the twilight. And in that gentle silence, Clara felt peace, not the fragile kind born from forgetting, but the strong, steady kind born from remembering. Her life had been torn apart, rebuilt, and forever changed by a creature who couldn't speak, yet said more than anyone else ever could. And though his paw prints faded from the ground, they remained forever pressed into her heart, guiding her, grounding her, reminding her that sometimes the smallest voices are the ones that save us all.